Well, welcome back to another episode of the Virginia Consumer Podcast. This week, we are going to discuss a little bit of why our case was not able to proceed successfully through the system and explain a little bit about the relationship between the media in Virginia and politicians in Virginia and how those two things work hand in hand to ensure that outcomes are never anyone's fault and also never really able to hold businesses accountable. So that's kind of what we're going to be going over today. I'm Andy. I am a consumer advocate at the Virginia Consumer, and this is Marty.
I'm Marty, and I support Andy at the Virginia Consumer.
If you're not familiar with our case, we moved to Virginia roughly 15 years ago, and eventually after time decided that we had outgrown our existing home and needed to move into something new, and the opportunity came along to build a new construction house. And if you've seen anything online about buying a new construction house, I'm pretty sure our case could probably rival the worst outcome. Because we've had floods, we've had fires, we've had all three ceilings fall in on themselves. We have proven that there were building code violations. We have proven that the contractor we hired went behind our back to hire an unlicensed subcontractor. And the only thing that really came of any of those allegations was that the regulatory board in Virginia, known as DPOR, the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation, basically assisted the builder to not only clean up his record, but to avoid any kind of accountability. And as a result, there are now over 10 lawsuits in Virginia courts related to this particular builder. And this is a small town. So if you think about the impacts of bad regulation stretched over an entire state, we are entering a catastrophic loss for families and consumers. And that's not an exaggeration. That is the only way to describe this, because many of us have been displaced. Many of us have had to walk away from homes entirely. And if the state is going to promise that American dream and say that if you save your money and you work hard and you do the right things and you buy a house in America, you've achieved the best standard of living you could hope for, you can't then deregulate the system to the point where all of that money is absorbed by the builder. The house is unlivable and it's made out of cardboard and mold. And that's basically what happened to us. Do you agree?
I think whenever I hear deregulation, I just want to make the point. There's a big chunk of the population, when they hear deregulation, less regulations, immediately it's a straight line thought to pro-business, good for the economy. Think about regulations that are absurd that you've heard many, many times when people are against regulation. I'm not for unnecessary regulation. I'm not for foolish regulation. What I'm against is calling an absence of regulation or deregulation something other than diminishing the rule of law. If something is an absurd rule, I don't think anybody's going to push too hard back. But if it comes down to you have something in a contract, and in the name of deregulation, we're not going to honor what's in a contract. We're not going to have a straight line as far as is something legal or illegal for certain contractors / corporations / connections to donors, but for everybody else it is. And that creates, I don't want to jump off topics, but that creates a situation where people can't trust, they can't do business, they won't invest because it would be foolish to do otherwise. That's not pro-business at all. An environment where you can't trust the contract and you can't trust whatever they call themselves as far as regulation, it's really kind of a buffer to create the impression of regulation to justify less regulation. But in reality, it's a protection business for certain contractors that are connected to certain donors. And that's a pretty bold claim. And in an environment where everybody wants to say, well, we'll sue you for saying something that's defamation, nobody's suing us because that would allow us to enter evidence and get in front of a court and a jury of our peers, which is just exposes the situation more. So the reason that we don't have those kinds of problems is because we've got evidence and we can connect the dots. And at this point, we just want to help people understand because as of right now, at least in Virginia, I think Virginia has taken a kind of like colonial slash British plantation mindset that really does distinguish the rights of some citizens versus others. It's too consistent to think this isn't kind of embedded in the culture. And forgive me for saying that. It's not an anti-American position. It's an anti-colonial, anti-British position. And so we every step of the way, and now we found a new connection. Andrea found a new connection. Every step of the way, we would think, well, certainly they've broken the law, so the regulatory folks will apply some pressure. When the regulatory folks wouldn't, or hide evidence, destroy evidence, take evidence that wasn't even related to our case in the place of evidence related to our case, we thought surely someone higher up in the chain of command would do something. Every time we were radically disappointed. Every time the system double or triple down on bad evidence or lack of evidence or incorrect evidence with no support for us, it just got to the point where we realized it's not that the system is broken. The system is working exactly as it was intended to. And then one more connection happened when we had a film crew over from the local, what is it, CBS?
No, it would well, CBS was a different story, but this
Okay,
was
ABC.
it's ABC. So
Okay, so
it's News 8 in Virginia in Richmond. And basically what had happened was our case was in this in between stage. We had been through one hearing, and what we found was that the regulators did. They, in fact, removed all the evidence from our file. And when we tried to alert the regulatory board to this fact and say, hey, whoever is running this case, which at the time was Free Williams, he's still in charge of adjudication. He basically erased all the work the investigator did and would not let us reference any of our supporting evidence, removed all the files from the evidence that was going to be presented to the board at DPOR, and rendered our case unsupportable. You can't bring charges against someone and not be able to show any of the evidence. If we're saying you haven't completed something and they're saying you can't show a photograph of the item that is incomplete, how do you defend that? How do you bring that forward? And it was pretty clear that the contractor that we're speaking of, once his attorney got involved, the entire case shifted on a dime. And I can never fully get my head around it. And then just recently, I put another connection together, and I don't have the ability to say for certain, but I'm going to share with you what happened and what I saw. And basically, during this process where I was trying to say, hey, not only is this contractor using an unlicensed subcontractor, which is illegal in the state of Virginia, he's doing it all throughout the county and other counties. Plus, we've got these issues of the file not being handled properly in accordance with the law, and thus violating my civil rights because I was not able to have equal representation in this legal process. I suddenly got a call from ABC 8, which is News 8 Virginia, and they decided to pick up our case. This is after we talked to CBS 6, and the reporter who called me on that case basically now only doing interviews with one of the representatives responsible for this mess. This is after that. Another news organization called and said, we want to do an interview with you. And they came to our house and they filmed. And it took probably 3 hours. And we opened up our files and we shared all of our documentation. We did an interview. They filmed our home. They actually came and sat and saw the air conditioner disconnected on our driveway that had been left there just, as it was. And I wasn't it was hard because I did reach out to all of the news organizations, but I wondered why you would spend that much time going back and forth, that much expense, have the actual anchor come to my house to film, and never air the story or contact any of the other victims that I had given them access to. I said, these are the other victims. It's a group of us. Instead, they went ahead and did like a puff piece for DPOR. So the other day, I just so happened to see someone leave a positive review for DPOR. And I was like, that's weird because nobody thinks DPOR is doing a good job. Not as far as a licensing agency, not as far as regulation. They have a terrible rating, thousands of ratings, all bad. So I was like, who would leave a good review? And when I saw it was their director of communication. So I thought it was curious. It was on LinkedIn. I clicked on her name and then I took a look at her resume.
Well, she's pulling that up. I just want to make the point too that when you say, oh, they came by and filmed, how long does that take? What's involved? They were at our home for 3 to 4 hours, the reporter and the cameraman. They set up. So we're talking about travel for both parties. So let's say half hour both ways. That's 8 to 10 hours of labor related to this story. And nothing happened, nothing aired. There was communication back and forth up to the election, but that was it. And so effectively what happened was it created the impression. I was, be perfectly honest with you, I think I was incredibly skeptical. I just assumed that local media would not cover something that had too much evidence because that would impact or could impact advertising dollars, or it could also make some people uncomfortable. That was my assumption, that there was kind of a understanding that we're going to report on things, but we're not going to really report on things.
As to find out that the director of communications, now she's working at the Employment Commission, but then she just moved on through to continue working at the state. But here's where she worked for the longest time, which was at ABC 8 News, WRIC, Nexstar. At the time that News 8 came to our house to do that, Nexstar was looking at my LinkedIn quite a bit. I kept getting these hits from Nexstar. So do I think that they probably had conversations when the reporter went to question DPOR about our findings? Yeah. The reporter's going to come to our house, she's going to record, and then she's going to go and get DPOR's side of the story. This is the lady she's going to end up talking to. She's holding dual positions. She's working for the government as director of communications at all of their failing boards. She's going to be who the anchor talks to, and they have a relationship through Nexstar. I completely believe a favor could get called in and be like, hey, this is not a good look. Maybe run something else. I totally do. I have no way of proving it, but I mean, to come and waste the time to not even air a story seems crazy. But then the more you look, the more you see. This same person, the director of communication, also was issued an award by Virginia Delegate Rob Bell. And I did not really know who Rob Bell was, aside from the fact that if you heard of the Tebow bill, he was one of the patrons of that bill who wanted to ensure that if Virginia was going to maintain reproductive freedom, that the only way a woman be able to receive an abortion would be if she had a transvaginal ultrasound. This guy, okay? A little creepy to try and force a transvaginal ultrasound when you can absolutely just do it over the belly. This is not a necessary procedure. Most of the women are probably like, oh my God, yeah. That's an extra level of traumatization that nobody needs. So that was obviously changed in the assembly because gross. If you look at who he was, he ran to be our attorney general. But because he didn't get the office of the attorney general, he ended up leaving his post. He resigned his seat so that he could go and work with Jason Miyares. And here I've posted just a couple of the articles about Jason Miyares. We have talked about his influence on our case before, and he basically completely denied any kind of FOIA request that we had. I've also brought forth memos where DPOR spoke directly to say, hey, we are fully aware that there are contractors doing this to consumers. They are losing millions of dollars. but we're not going to send those cases to the Commonwealth attorneys because they don't want to take those cases. So it was his office that allowed that to take place. When we have the memos going back and forth, this is no longer a conversation of what if. Developers, real estate, and the Home Builders Association, those are the largest lobbyists in Virginia, will just not bring any cases against any builders, and they'll come here because we're good for business. And if you don't believe me, look at these cases too, where the inspector general was asked to come in and take a look at what Jason Mayares was doing, alleging fraud, alleging an abuse of power, and alleging that he was using the office for his own personal gain during the campaign for re-election. And the inspector general said they didn't have the authority to look into fraud in that office, which is absolutely false. That's exactly what the inspector general is supposed to do. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Do you
That
have,
makes
well,
sense
do you have the email where we checked directly and the response was, this is not part of my job description?
with the inspector
That's what I
general.
want to show. Yeah.
Oh yeah, let me
Because
pull that.
I think people aren't going to understand, like, when we're glossing over headlines, and I always, when I think of like certain keywords, frankly, like MAGA, and I'm like, I feel like those are buzzwords to get people to pick a side and shut off certain amounts of, like, hear what we're saying. This isn't, for me, this isn't a political one way or the other. I was involved in politics a little bit, and now what I've seen over the last few years, especially in Virginia in particular, let's just say I've lost confidence that that's really how things are done. But we directly contacted the inspector general's office, because this isn't like we tried a couple things. We made a few calls. We sent a few emails. It wasn't the case. Every time we found something that was blatantly false, we would ask the people responsible for clarifying. They refused and pointed us up the ladder. And so we continue to go up the ladder. This is the response from the inspector general when asked about if he could help and be involved. Can you read that?
And yeah, sure. They said, thank you for contacting the State Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Hotline of the Office of the State Inspector General, the OSIG. The hotline handles allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse in executive branch agencies of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Therefore, your complaint falls outside the scope and jurisdiction of the hotline, and the OSIG does not have jurisdiction to intervene in the issues you have described. But if you look at the Code of Virginia, which I have right here, it says the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation is within the executive branch. So if I am alleging fraud within the executive branch, that is precisely what the OSIG is supposed to intervene for and check in on. And they didn't do it. They would decline to do it. And they did the same when other people brought other allegations of fraud at the attorney general's office. And the sad part is, where there's smoke, there's fire. Former attorney general Jason Mayares, he has 2 lawsuits against him right now for misappropriation of funds and wrongful firing, or the lawsuit rather is just the wrongful firing. But it's based on the fact that he tried to force employees to fund nonprofits that were nonprofits of people working in the attorney general's office. He wanted employees to fund those nonprofits with taxpayer dollars. That is a conflict of interest, and they are not allowed to do that. So it got flagged. And when they protested and said, hey, this doesn't meet the criteria, they were fired, both of them. So the fact that I'm alleging there was a problem at the attorney general's office, yeah, I feel pretty confident in saying the inspector general should have checked it out, especially when it affects so many families. And I was never just bringing information regarding our own case. I was giving them files that related to statewide corruption, wide fraud, multiple developers and developments using unlicensed subcontractors. Their own documentation says the same thing. And still, we bought our house in 2020, at the end of 2020. It is now 2026. Absolutely nothing has been done except the laws have been made even more deregulated, even more permissible for businesses.
I think, again, I keep coming back to that deregulated thing. Deregulated would mean that, let's say there's no law. You can't make claims, you can't make commitments, or I guess you can in Virginia, but I don't think people would think when they think deregulated or less regulations, they think what that translates to is there can be a commitment in a contract that causes you to purchase something and that commitment not there. And then there's no course of action for you to take to get a resolution. And that's been the case over and over and over again. In fact, now that people are contacting the Virginia consumer and sharing their stories more and more, you can see this pattern is consistent.
It's
And
not
I
just consumers, it's also vendors. The state is allowing certain vendors to act in ways that other vendors are not permitted to act because there is a connection back to media and to politics. And I do want to share this page too because I don't think people could ever wrap their heads around how connected things are, you know? And I know I brought up the Jason Mayara's connection, the OSIG never looking into his office. Here's another example. And we just got done with the redistricting in the maps, right? This is Jason Mayara's PAC, the Virginians for Fair Maps. It was him and Eric Cantor as leadership, and if we look at the donations there, they are claiming just in this pack, this is not the only one. Just in this pack, they received almost $20 million. If we look at where those donations went, overwhelmingly 15 million and change went to TV and radio. And this all ran through one company, Del Rey Media, which had absolutely no other contributions or accounts on
operating history
record.
of note.
No history. It was just Virginians for Fair Maps. And I bet if we looked into who owns Del Rey Media, there'll be some connection right back to Jason Mayara's. This is their website. I'm not kidding you. This is it. If I'm going to spend $15 million with one company, this is not going to be the company I'm going to choose with like an AI logo and the most ridiculous website on the planet. It just wouldn't happen. And this is the story that News 8 ended up running with instead of ours. Pause before you pay, how to verify a contractor is licensed. This is ridiculous when this is what we gave them. Okay, this is our house, the ceiling collapsing, the finishes, the state of our house in it's terrible. I can't even describe it. Remnants from the fires that we had. This is the company. And they
Well,
have 1-star reviews that go on for days. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. To abandon this story for how to look up whether or not your contractor's licensed. My contractor was licensed. He then did illegal stuff behind my back.
that's the thing that I've noticed. I saw it a few I watched a little bit of local news here, I don't know, 2, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when we were like, why wouldn't they report on this? And there was this like consistent pattern where someone representing some authority would say something. They'd have two sections, and the first thing they would say would make total sense. You could follow it. There was a logic to it. And the second thing they would say would be something that made no sense and basically negated their ability to take any action or be responsible for any action. And then conveniently, there was no follow up question as to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And you just contradicted yourself. Can you elaborate? That didn't happen. It was this kind of 3-step thing. And that response from DPOR, what that tells me through the media is when they say, make sure your contractor's licensed. In Virginia, that doesn't mean a whole lot because our contractor used unlicensed contractors. He subbed out the work to them. Their response to us was, one, they were licensed. The head of DPOR said they're licensed, who then became the chief of staff for Winsome Sears governor candidate. That individual said a particular company was licensed. That was proven in court. That never happened. He doubled down, I think, 2 or 3 times in writing that it was. It wasn't. What is his name? Keithor
Kishore
Shota?
Thoda, he was chief of
Kishore
staff
Thoda.
to Winsome Sears, and I did
Okay.
another video if anyone wants to check out the TikToks. I did a video where I went through DPOR's office and I showed who these people were. Everyone who touched our file was donating to Winsome Sears. The chief of staff for Winsome Sears made the decision in our case. They are heavily promoted by developers, builders, and the real estate lobby. Am I surprised that someone alerting to the fact that this industry is abusing consumers, stealing money, and not delivering the homes was going to be, pushed aside? No, I'm not surprised, especially not considering that this same group has now allowed our contractor under a different name with the same realtor, Yeatman Realty, to move to Goochland to develop Yellowstone communities and continue the process in Goochland with a Commonwealth attorney who would not take the case, likely because he got quite a large campaign donation from a company associated with our builder and helped our builder to sell property that would relate back to our case. So if we got a judgment, we would need to put a lien against property. Well, now that property belongs to another developer who ended up donating to that Commonwealth attorney. Do I think that these cases are going to move forward? No. In Goochland, they didn't even want that development. It was struggling to make it through. And suddenly, with the help of that Commonwealth attorney who was then on the board of supervisors, it passed. It went through against the will of the people. And shortly thereafter, he got his donation and went on to become Commonwealth attorney. Do I have the right to say that it's all related? No, but it's awfully suspicious. And if we had a decent inspector general, maybe he would look into it.
I think if I look at this and I think all these people involved have done a terrible job along the way. And so we have all these consequences. The media is certainly not going to report on it, not locally. Commonwealth attorneys, a lot of them are tied in financially, so they're not going to pursue it. You've done some stories on that. And I thought about this and I thought they're not doing a bad job. They're doing a phenomenal job, but their job is not to protect citizens or the rule of law or industry even. It's to protect donors from the law. Because if we can bring you a situation that shows an easy link to hundreds of felonies just in our county or surrounding counties, if we can produce that, which then leads to human trafficking, and you say, well, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. Unlicensed, undocumented labor practices, taking advantage of people in that situation, especially, is going to open the door for human trafficking. It's foolish to think otherwise, and it's going to open the door for drug trafficking. And I'm not talking about conventional drugs. Now we've got fentanyl. So if that's a real problem, the people that ignore hundreds of felonies in the name of what? This is good for business. It's not good for business, and it certainly isn't good for the people in the industry who are trying to operate under the law. They get crushed, and then often those aren't donors, because the last contractor Andy talked to, one of the last, I should say, they also weren't getting paid by our builder, and it harmed them. Now, maybe they're donating to the wrong politician, but my guess is they're probably thinking, well, I run a business and it's not about kicking back to someone in elected office. Well, apparently it is, because these individuals have all the evidence. It seems to be, and I'll say it has to go outside of Virginia, because it seems to be that this grift is very much bipartisan. Unless I see something change very quickly with some of the folks that we're engaged with, I have to conclude that this is just how Virginia does business. And the reason that the quick boxes are going up in apartment buildings, and I look at these things and I think, these look terrible, and they're being built quickly and they're not going to last, it's because they don't care if it lasts. They care about whatever piece of the pie they're going to get for that transaction. And when you can document it, when you have all the evidence, when you lay it out and you put it in front of everybody and they choose to ignore it, what does that tell you? They're doing their job, and their job is to signal, I will take any amount of pressure. I will avoid the law as much as possible to protect the interests of those who put me in this seat. And when I say put me in, not the voters, the donors. If that's what they're trying to do, mission accomplished.
Thanks for listening to Virginia Consumer. Everything shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The views expressed are personal opinions based on the individual experiences of our hosts and guests. They do not constitute legal, financial, or medical advice and do not represent the views of any affiliated individuals or organizations. Always do your own research and consult a qualified professional about your specific situation.